Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so excited to bring you this webinar on equity and inclusion for individuals with disabilities. I'm Rhonda, and also you'll see in the chat there, we have the real-time closed captioning. If you would like to follow there, you could, there's instructions on how you can turn it on through Zoom, or there is the real-time captions link there that you can access. Let's first start out. You all use the chat, there's the question area, and let us know where you're joining from today. First, I would love if we could start out with, before we kind of dig deep into stuff, I want everybody to close their eyes. And I know you're probably thinking I'm crazy, which could be possible, but close your eyes. And when I say the word disability to you, what is the first image that you see? And what's the picture that you see? If you could use the chat and share that and be open, there's no right or wrong answers, but share what's the image you see when you hear the word disability. If everyone wants to use the chat and just kind of share. And don't be bashful now. Yes, Abby, your family. Kelly, wheelchair, yes. Oh, look, we're even stepping up here. Use the picture. You get bonus points. Family, my daughter. Unique, yes. Friend's daughter. Love that. I love the sharing. So see how we all have a different picture that we see in our mind? Now, I want, if you want to close your eyes again, I want, when I say the word disability, what one word describes the feeling when you hear the word disability? And again, there's no right or wrong answers, and you can open your eyes up. Joy. Hope. Challenges, yes. Hardship. It was hard to find a picture for that one, wasn't it? Stress, the boy, now that is true. Yes. Love. Yeah, so see, we all have different feelings as well when we hear the word disability. And please share more if you hadn't had a chance in there. So we're going to revisit that back at the end, and I'll share with you what I feel. But when we were working on this strength, yes, love that. And when we're kind of going through this, again, this is to help to not only to create awareness, but how we're going to all work together to make a difference. I wanted to kind of just share with you a little bit, if you're not familiar with Kentucky SPIN, we're Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network, and our mission is to link families and individuals with disabilities to valuable resources to help them lead productive, fulfilling lives, to reach all of their dreams. We're not here to do it for anyone, we're here to support, and not only families, but providers, professionals in the field. We are here and are huge on partnership because we know that through partnership, anything can be accomplished, right? And our core values are respect, education, dignity, and empowerment. Again, through peer support model, this has always been the cornerstone of Kentucky SPIN and the work that we do. One of the main grants that we have is through the U.S. Department of Education under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which many of you all are familiar with and know because of IEPs in school, Individual Education Programs, or IFSPs, Individual Family Service Plans, that is through the Kentucky Early Intervention System, formerly known as First Steps. But we are funded under that same law that provides those for the Parent Training and Information Project. Now, something that's very important to know is we don't act as attorneys. We do not represent in meetings, whether it be IEP meetings, families, but we're here to empower one another, build that partnership, not to make the decisions for anyone, but to make sure that everybody has all of the information so that they can make informed decisions on behalf of their self or their family. Now, one of the things I'll tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a sibling. There's 5 of us. My twin sister had a severe learning disability and as an adult was diagnosed bipolar. She's our special angel in heaven now. Then my brother Grant, who is the fiery redhead and the only one without a twin. Grant does have cerebral palsy and is legally blind. And then the youngest of the twins, my brother, is ADHD. All of them are smarter than I could wish to be. They all had IEPs throughout school, and I am not officially diagnosed OCD, but like Mom always said, honey, we don't need a doctor to tell us. So I am a bit OCD to the max. But we are all here to help one another through the peer support and how we can build those partnerships. Now, we're going to go ahead and dive right on in. Now, before we go into that, because we're going to kind of go over the federal laws, and then we're going to look at some Kentucky disability data, then serving and supporting individuals with disabilities, and then what can we do? Because we all play a role, no matter if you are an individual with a disability, a family, a provider, we all play a role in the success for all of us. So let me ask you all this. Are you all familiar with the federal laws that oversee and are there for individuals with disabilities? And those being, we're going to kind of look at sort of Section 504 and ADA. Are you all familiar and have heard of those? And if you haven't, there's no yes. Okay, good. And a lot of people are familiar with ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. But many people think that just means that there has to be a wheelchair ramp, which that is, for businesses, which that is in a very, very important part of ADA, but that's just one tiny section of it. So we're going to kind of explore here. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, that's a civil rights law, and that prohibits discrimination based on disability. Now, this applies to any agency that receives federal funds. Now, what it is that when you look at it, most places, now say if you are with if you're with an agency within Kentucky and you're not sure, most of the times a lot of the grants that you get at state levels also include some federal funding in them. So many of us are fit under the requirement of the civil rights law of Section 504 because of that, because there is some federal funds, and it doesn't necessarily mean just federal funds that's disability related, any federal funds. Say if you are at a daycare center and there are federal funds that come down through the nutrition program, you're still getting federal funds. So you're held under the same requirement under Section 504 that prohibits discrimination. So many times people may not realize that they also fall under that. Now, what this is this isn't just within the school system, because many people, if you've heard of 504, you're maybe familiar with 504 plans in the public schools, right? So yes, schools would be under 504 if they get federal funds. But 504 is so much broader than just school. It is out in the community. Any agency that provides community service, say if the example I used a daycare, if they get any type of federal funds, then they fall under Section 504. Also, too, employers for individuals with disabilities, they have to be provided the equal opportunity, the same program, benefits, and services. So a lot of people aren't as familiar with that they're covered under that. And it allows to accommodate any accommodations or modifications so that you can fully participate and get the benefits and services the same as your non-disabled peers. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's a civil rights law too. That is the same, just like as 504. It prohibits discrimination based on disability, applies to any agency regardless of federal funding regardless of the funding that is received. So you could see that everyone's going to be under the ADA, but for many, you're going to be under 504 and ADA. And again, this is not just education specific. And it looks at, in the public life, just like the example we used about ADA, many people are familiar with, there has to be ramps. So you still have physical access the same as anyone who doesn't have a disability. You have to have access to the stores in your community, for jobs, school, transportation. There has to be that same access as non-disabled persons. And you can't be discriminated on based on your disability. Now, a lot of times people may not be as familiar. So what would define disability under ADA and 504? That's going to be a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one major life activity. You have a record or a history of a disability. Now, when we say record or history of a disability, this doesn't necessarily mean this is a medical recorded history. Of course, that could apply and qualify, but you can have a history of a disability without it actually being a medical history, right? Or professionally diagnosed. Another that many people are not as familiar with is perceived as having a disability. And I know some people may think, well, how would that even be possible? Well, if you remember back, 504 and ADA are civil rights laws that prohibits discrimination. If you perceive me as having a disability and I'm being discriminated against based on that, regardless if I really have the disability or not, I'm still being discriminated against based on that. So you would be covered by 504 and ADA. Now, let me ask you all, were you all familiar with those sections? And please use the chat, or if you have any questions throughout, were you all familiar with those parts of 504 ADA? Yes, you were? Okay, awesome. Yes. Oh, see, that's wonderful. Y'all need to be on here teaching me. So when we look at the major life activities, we're going to be looking at this is caring for yourself, communicating, concentrating, bending, reading, thinking. It could be a whole variety of things. Heard of them, but always good to review. Oh, thank you. Yes, the more I think I know, the more I think I need to learn. I do that every day. So these are just a few examples of what a major life activity could be. And if you are limited in that to where you can't fully participate, that's sort of some of the determining factors of qualifying and falling under that you have a disability. Now, a lot of people may be, familiar with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now, that is a federal law that is a specific education law, whereas 504 and ADA, again, we said the civil rights law, and it is not just specific to education. And it is not time-bound by ages, right? So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is sort of time-bound, and it is the birth through 21 unless you graduate sooner. Now, with this is because you may have heard of, and I know I mentioned at the beginning, like for children, 3 through 21 may have an IEP in school, or they may not qualify for an IEP. And through Part C, the early intervention, the birth to 3, they would have the IFSP. Now, note that when we look at this, that many times people don't realize, well, they could have, they think if you have been diagnosed with a disability, you should qualify under all of them. But that's not necessarily the case, because under IDEA and the definition of disability, you're going to have many more that may not qualify under IDEA through their definition of disability. So the definition is it must show an adverse effect that impedes the progress where educational performance is significantly and consistently below the level of children of similar age. This would be their non-disabled peers. They must also, in addition, meet the criteria of one or more of the disability categories, and also need specially designed instruction and related services. So now I go back to this visual that I cannot take credit that we created this. Find a Florida did, and they're so gracious that they let us use this because, again, I'm a visual person. So when you think of, and especially now, again, going back to in relation to education, you're going to have many more children who qualify under 504 and ADA than do IDEA. But know that if your child is under that smaller umbrella that qualifies under IDEA, they also qualify and are covered under Section 504 and ADA. Now, so a lot of what we're doing, and when we're talking about the equity and inclusion, is that it's important to know about IDEA in relation to education. But the broader 504 and ADA is going to apply regardless and throughout, our lives in our everyday encounters and interactions with programs and services and having the equal access. Now, we're going to share at the end, there are some resources. If you want to know more about the individual laws, we have links to the infographics, which is the supporting and serving individuals with disabilities and the equity and inclusion. And in that infographic, there is links to ADA under the resources section, ADA, and also 504 and IDEA too, if you want to learn more about those. And we always can help you through that. If you have any questions, we help not only individuals with disabilities and their families, but also providers and professionals throughout the state and sort of stepping through to know available resources. So now, all of that, I know that's a lot in a short amount of time, but one of the things that when we are looking here at the disability data, and one thing that I want to make sure that I bring up and I share with you all, I don't know if you all are familiar, and you may be on the SEAC, and it heard us present that there and know of the work that we're doing. But if you're not familiar with the SEAC, it's a state interagency council for services and supports to children and transition age youth. This is state agencies, youth representative, parent representative, family organization. KYSPIN is the family organization member of it. But it's not only the ones that are members. It is so many others, other family organizations, other parents, youth. There are many of us in agencies, providers that are working together. Now, through that, there is the SEAC Disability Standing Committee, which is working to remove those barriers. And we are looking at, this is, of course, our children in transition age youth, especially in relation for individuals with disabilities and their families, to sort of remove those barriers, and the work that we're doing to create the equity and inclusion, because it's very critical that no matter what table you're at or area, any work that's being done in regards to equity and inclusion, we need to be very intentional that we are including individuals with disabilities, because we are historically, many times not intentionally, but not considered in that equation, which also leads to, the inequality in the access to programs and services. And not intentionally, because we're not here to slap hands. We're here to look at how we work together, how we make things different, and how we move from where we're at right now to where we move in more of a positive light. So when we look at it, we have found too, and with the work with the SEAC Disability Standing Committee, is people are, many with it, whether it be state agencies or individual agencies, people are not tracking. They don't know if the individual, if the child or youth has a disability, or for adult services. If it's not a specific program for individuals with disabilities, they are not tracking those things. So one of the things in the work that we're doing, it's important to know, not only to know, but to be able to report out. So it's very hard to find some very specific disability data, but we're going to kind of step through what we have found, because we want everyone to see why it's important, because we know if it's one person, it's important, right? And we need to be considered, and there needs to be equality and opportunities for all of us, regardless of our disability and how it affects us. But many people don't realize the percentage of people who have disabilities. And keep in mind, as we go through this data, this is minimum, because there are so many that's going to qualify under that ADA and 504 definition that we talked about that nobody's tracking. So keep in mind, as we look at this data, this is going to be bare minimum. So when we look at this data specifically of children with special health care needs, you're going to see on that 22.4% of children have special health care needs in Kentucky, whereas nationally it's only 19.5%. We're going to also look here where it says the child has one or more reported, and this is mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral problem, which would is that in Kentucky we are at 28.8%, with nationally 23.3%. So those are huge numbers over the national average. Now, we're going to look at some of the data that is on through the Kentucky Department of Education in their school report cards. So the reason I wanted to share this here is we are all used to seeing in our demographic data where we see the breakdown, the ethnic breakdown. Now, this is for overall for students in Kentucky and Kentucky public schools, whether they have a disability or not. You're going to see that, and I want us to remember these this data, because I want to here in a little bit, we're going to share some more information. A key one here is our overall population, 10.8% African American students. I want you to remember that, because that percentage is going to be very critical when we're looking at some Office of the Courts data on the number of students with disabilities that are African American, that way exceeds this when you're looking at the overall total population of students. But I wanted to share this. We have so much amazing work that is being done right now in regards to racial and ethnic equality, which is so critical, and we have a long way to go. And everybody is used to seeing sort of the percentage breakdowns, but I also wanted to compare that so that you could see, well, what is the breakdowns of the number of students with disabilities in Kentucky schools? Now, I want you to keep in mind, this is not representative. This is a bare minimum again, that 16.06% are students with disabilities that qualify for an IEP. you're going to have many more that qualify under the ADA and 504 definition. So this is a minimum percentage. And again, keep in mind, this is of students who have been identified and have an IEP during that time frame, that school year. There were 16.06%. Again, that's a minimum. And so you're going to have many more that might have a 504 plan or would qualify under ADA and 504 that may not be identified with those plans or may not qualify or have been identified for an IEP in school. So this kind of shows you the breakdown of the disability types that make up that 16.6%. So you're going to see here that the SL, the speech or language impairment, is the highest percentage. And then the next is the specific learning disability category. And then the other health impaired category would be next. And that's going to be like ADD, ADHD, Tourette syndrome, a whole variety of disabilities that would qualify under that. Now, we, because this is also, too, another one that of those 16.6%, then it further breaks down of that, then what is the racial ethnic breakdown of those students. And you're going to see here, again, remember this, just like we were remembering that 10.8, but the 10.66% of our students are African American who have a disability and are identified. Now, that's what's going to be, and also too, our Hispanic population is 6.33%. Now, we're diving over into the Administrative Office of the Courts data. Now, when you look at this overall data, and this is broken down by racial, ethnic of students who are identified and reported as having a disability. Now, this could be that they have a 504 plan, have an IEP, or they may not have those in place. Now, notice here, too, what's critical is that of the students who've been involved with the Office of the Courts, now what this is there have been charges filed, right? And so the court designated workers of the CDWs are working with the students. Look how many of the students actually have more than one disability that they report. Also, learning disability and mental disability. These are key indicators that when I look at the data, I'm thinking, okay, why do we have so many who have the multiple disability, learning disability, and mental disability? What is services and supports that they may need so we keep them from getting to the Office of the Courts, or once to the Office of the Courts, what do they need so that they can be successful and we get them off of that track, right? Now, remember when I said pay attention to those, that 10.8 of the overall population, African-American students, and then when we looked further at our students with disabilities, the 10.66. So when we look at this is what greatly concerns me, is that when we look here at our grand totals, right, we're looking at 18.6% of students with disabilities who are African American are involved with the court system. Whereas when you look at the number of students within the schools, that the average representation was 10.8 or 10.66. That is a huge jump, and should be to me, is a huge red flag. Now, when we look at so office, and again, remember, all of these are minimum data. The Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, there were during this, the pre-employment transition services, those are services that students could be eligible and receive. And there were a total of 25,159 that were potentially eligible to receive that. They had about 17,845 had received those pre-employment transition services. Now, of that, because it doesn't mean that everyone who gets the pre-ET services also then meet with a counselor and become eligible for full VR services. Only about 7,314 of them received full VR services. So that is a huge gap in those that are potentially possibly eligible for that an opportunity, because we know the more services and supports that we have in place, and especially looking at transition, is making sure that all of our youth with disabilities and their families know that of the services they could receive through vocational rehabilitation if they qualified. Now, again, keep in mind these numbers, this is for the whole state, but not all school districts provide or use vocational rehabilitation for their pre-ETs. So again, we're looking at minimum numbers. So this is just minimal of the amount of students with disabilities who could be potentially eligible for service programs and benefits that could really help them to transition into successful adult lives. So part of when we look at and in education, there is, this would be students who had an IEP in school. They call it the yo-yo survey. And what it is after for students who transition out, there is a survey, like the 1 year out survey from students who had an IEP that is done. Now, on this, there is a high number of students, again, when you look at the higher education, and many, I want us to draw some close attention here, because I am glad that we reported this way. Was it competitive employment or other employment? But one of the things, too, when we are talking about equity and inclusion of individuals with disabilities, it's one of the only areas that I know that still exists in the inequality of, did you know that people with disabilities could be paid less than minimum wage? And that's okay. If it's not what's considered competitive employment, they may not have the same opportunities as their non-disabled peers for promotions, the same pay. And in this, most people do not have any idea of this. And the inequality that exists, it's beyond wrong, but, how do we change this? I'm so glad years back they started reporting and collecting data. Was it competitive employment or other employment? Because most people, when they saw employment, they thought, oh, well, it was employment just like everyone else would be able to get. No, because many times it's based on your disability and what people assume you can't do, or what you should do, or choices that they have made for you. And so the opportunities, just because you have a disability, greatly affect the success in your transition to adulthood. So even of the students who filled out the survey who have some type of higher education, which meaning full or part, they were enrolled in a full or part-time, could be a 2-year program or 4-year program, and is of at least completed 1 term. So only 5.7% of them had competitive employment. 3.9% of those had other employment. So they have some higher education, but you still see that 3.9% of those aren't even able to get the competitive employment. Other education could be full or part-time, and this could be an education or training program. And so you see that 2.8% of those had competitive employment, but 1.4% of those had other employment. And then you look at, even with the higher education and other education, you had 6.4% didn't have any employment, and 1.2% of other education didn't. No post-secondary education. 29.1% of them had no employment. So there are huge barriers that exist. And I just think it's important, especially that we draw and shed light on the fact that there is such a thing as competitive employment and other employment, because just as it is set up, there is inequality there, because we all should have the opportunity to make minimum wage to actually have the same opportunities for wages, benefits, and opportunities as our coworkers without disabilities. So it's sort of another area too, and again, with all of this, these are bare minimums, is that this is the CDC data. This is going to kind of tell you for our children and youth, sort of kind of give you like an idea of once they hit adulthood. We're looking at the adults in Kentucky of 33%. 1 in every 3 adults in Kentucky have a disability. That's huge. When you look at, again, this is bare minimum. There could be many that qualify under ADA and 504 that's not accounted for in this. And you'll see here the breakdown of the mobility and cognition, a lot of things too. And the reason I want to bring this up about the adults with disabilities is because many of our parents, many of us have disabilities ourselves. And so being able to have equal access to be able regardless of the program you're with, there are different parental rights. Being able to fully participate in the benefits of the program to be able to help your child, because we know family engagement, regardless if it's education, if it is in healthcare, when we are all working together. But for many of the parents, there may be a barrier that exists because they have a disability themselves. I also wanted to share this critical information here too, which is huge in telling here, is that in Kentucky, when they were looking at that have reported that they have had depression, 48% of persons with disabilities in Kentucky reported having depression, whereas of adults within Kentucky without a disability, only 15%. So when you add in the effects of the disability along with depression, those are huge indicators. You see that also with the smoking, obesity, all of the other indicators there, the higher risk. Those are things to keep into consideration because they play a huge role in an individual with a disability and their lives and being able to be successful at accessing programs, at being able, not just within the program that they're in, but the experiences that they have throughout their day and throughout their life. So let me ask you all, I know that was a lot we just went over. What does, and you all share, I'm going to pause for a minute to make sure there's no questions. When we talked about those definitions and how it affects, and then we start digging into the data, and again, I say like a broken record, keep in mind those are minimums because people are not tracking these things, and we know there are high disparities. How did you feel, and what were the thoughts as we went through that data? So I hope I hadn't put you off sleep yet. What are your all's thoughts on that, or concerns or questions that we need to be tracking it better? Yes. And for those of us, not only as families living it, but in the work that we do, I'm sure hold on just a second. The numbers are actually much higher, but you did, while explaining that these numbers are minimal, boom, my child will need an advocate for the rest of his life. Absolutely. I love the breakdown between competitive and other employment. As my daughter is applying to jobs, we have been astounded at how difficult the process has been. Yes, unfortunately, yes. Being intentional to include disabilities into data tracking, yes. It's starting to see the higher numbers in Kentucky compared to the national numbers. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Why aren't all districts providing pre-ETS transition services? So now they may be providing it, but it may not be that they are accessing it through, that's a great question, through Voc Rehab as the person providing it. So many districts, they don't have to use Voc Rehab to provide the pre-ETS. They may actually, within the district, have employees that are providing those pre-ETS, pre-employment transition services. So one thing that would be very beneficial, and that's a great question that you bring up, is that within your school district, I would ask what pre-ETS transition services are available and how do you access those? Because you know, the districts could get it, but it depends on how they're choosing to do pre-ETS services. But that is a great question. So when we look at serving and supporting individuals, and please keep chiming in here in the chat, is that, you know, what are some things that would be important to look at? So one of the things, building relationships, that's going to be key, because, you know, getting to know the person, not just the disability, because we're all unique, regardless if, you know, I had said, you know, how I am with OCD is going to be completely different from someone else, and my OCD is not me. Right? I have a disability. I have OCD. It doesn't have me. So I'm a person first. And many times, depending upon, a lot of what we have to do is fight the stigma that people assume, because, you know, there's a very different thing that you will see is that if you have a seen disability, people make assumptions. If you have an unseen disability, people make assumptions too. It's not that one is any easier than the other. Each are unique. Each have their own unique journeys that you travel. And, you know, we are not the disability. So build that relationship, not acquaintances. You know, ask the individual what they need for them to be successful. You know, because a lot of times, and I always try to think of it like this, because, excuse me, I'm a mama too, right? So as a mama, we assume we know what's best, right? Or this is what you need, this is, you know, and we have the best intentions, right? But it could be the total opposite of what they want or need. So ask them. You know, I know that most people have great intentions, but is it what they want? Is it what they need? And, you know, communicating often, not just when there are concerns. Looking at strengths. Build on strengths, because when you build those relationships, you know, looking at the strengths, we all have strengths and weaknesses. We use our strengths to help with the areas that are our weaknesses. Provide opportunities to engage at all levels, with, not for. Remember that, because, you know, I don't need you to make decisions for me. I am a part of the decision making. You know, we all need support, regardless if you have a disability or not. And that we are an equal partner, working to solve problems. You know, another thing too, treat individuals with hidden or the unseen disabilities with the same considerations you would as individuals with visual disabilities. One of the things, you know, and I had explained, you know, that within our own family, there's the seen disability, the unseen disabilities. Many times, and my brother Grant, who is a wonderful advocate for a lot of us throughout the state, everyone sees his physical disability and makes assumptions that he doesn't know anything. Well, I'm just going to tell y'all, he knows better than all of us put together, and he can help take care of everything. So looking at building those relationships, listening to the person, not making those assumptions, you know, perceptions. A lot of times we have these perceptions of, and there's judgment that comes along with it. Many people are not intentionally trying to judge one another, but it's automatic. So, it's based on your own experiences. So we have to be very intentional with one another on, what are our biases that we have, and how does that affect creating equity and inclusion for individuals with disabilities. Research. What does research say, about, not only about research the disability, but keep in mind the disability affects everyone differently, and supported decision making. That is huge when we're looking at serving and supporting individuals with disabilities. Just as we had shared about Kentucky SPIN, our role is not to do it for you, but is to support so that you know the options that are available to you, the processes that are in place, the resources to have access to them. So now when we look here, again, accessibility encompasses many things. Physical accessibility is just one type. Now we're going to see here just a second. I think Amber is going to show this little short video for us just a second.
Because my parents told me I have to be responsible.
Because my first coach told me, you can do this.
Because my teacher helped me see the choices.
Because my coach treated me like everybody else.
Because my boss showed me how to do a good job.
Because a mentor believed in my potential.
Is why I am where I am today.
I'm swimming faster than I ever dreamed I could.
I discovered that I could work as an artist.
I led my high school team to 2 championships.
I am a valuable employee.
I have a career that I am passionate about.
I will be whatever I want to be.
What can you do?
What can you do?
Like all young people, youth with disabilities should grow up expecting to work and succeed. For more information, visit whatcanyoudocampaign.org.
So as we kind of step through this, what are some of the things that that we can do, right? We all play a role. And I would love to hear in the chat some of the things too, as we're thinking of this, where you could make a difference, regardless if you're an individual with a disability, a family, a provider, and knowing that not only that the laws apply to us, but how do we ensure that that when we're talking about equity and inclusion, that we are providing not only meeting the law, but equal access and opportunity for persons with disabilities. Being intentional that we are considered when we are at the table in the work that we are doing with equity, inclusion, and the disparities that exist. Because we know as families and the work that we have done at Kentucky SPIN over the many years, we know the disparities are huge. We see it every day. We experience it every day. The data may not be being collected that shows that. And so having those honest conversations, what, biases do we have? I'm biased when it comes to disability. All of us are. Not that we are intentionally, but it's based on our experiences or our lack of personal experiences with them. What barriers exist? Looking at what barriers maybe within your organization or agency or program, what barriers are there? And making sure that individuals with disabilities are a part of the equity statement and the work, and not only a statement, but again, I know I'm repeating, but the work behind it, right? Because a statement only means so much if we don't put the work behind it to ensure it. Who can help us? All of us here are to help one another. Kentucky SPIN, many of the SEAC agencies, the work that's being done. When you're surveying, making sure, because there are a lot, especially with all we have all lived through over the last several years with COVID, there is a lot of surveys and sort of trying to get a good pulse of where we are all at right now in regards to social emotional well-being, and not only that, but also in our health. But being very intentional when you are doing surveys that you include individuals with disabilities, because it's going to be important to know, okay, so we've got some huge, just like we looked at that data when we were looking at the number of adults who experience depression at 48% of persons with disabilities in Kentucky adults versus only 15% of non-disabled. Those are huge indicators. So making sure that those things are included. Also, look at the current disability data that you have or have access to. Are you collecting any disability data? What are the gaps? What are the disparities? And sharing your data, again, not in any identifying area, but overall data that represents. Again, it's going to help all of us help our children, youth, and individuals with disabilities better by sharing that data. A critical part, because when we've been doing this work, everybody's like, well, we can't change what our qualifications through our program may be for someone with a disability to get a certain program, right? None of us are suggesting that. What we are talking about in the work that we are doing and trying to bring awareness to is within each agency and organization's demographic data collection. You not only need, when you have the racial and ethnic questions, you need to have, do you have a disability? And many people are like, oh, well, you can't ask that. Well, in your demographic data, just as you can ask racial and ethnic and gender, you can ask that. Why is that important? Well, it's important because then that should trigger, okay, well, they may need some accommodations so that they can have equal access, because we know we're under ADA and possibly Section 504, and we need to have the opportunity to create equal access to program services and benefits. So that's one reason that it's important to be asking that. Another is it's going to identify, are there disparities? It's going to open the door to give, and here were some of the sample questions. Ask, would you like to disclose you have a disability? Do you have any access or accommodation needs? So you're opening that door, because many individuals may not know that they have the right to this, but it still doesn't alleviate our responsibility to provide them, especially if it is creating a barrier in their access, how their disability affects them. So we're not asking anyone to change any program qualifications. This is in addition, and it's going to be very beneficial. Now, another thing too, if you ask that in demographic data and you happen to have through your program, here's a great example of, if you ask that and they're enrolled in school and you ask if they have a disability, then that might trigger, they might possibly qualify for an IEP or a 504 plan. So it would also trigger being able to access additional stuff, not, that was an education example, but through your agency and organization, other programs that might benefit them greatly. And also, too, designate a representative from your agency or organization on the SEAC Disability Standing Committee. This is, the work that we are doing is very critical. You can reach out to us. We can connect you and get you on that. Having everyone to, excuse me, sorry, the allergies, y'all. Everyone to not only see that we all play a role, but that we put the work behind the role. And there is there are so many things that I'm constantly working on and have all the great intentions, but go down the wrong path. But no one's perfect, and how we come together and be able to do this is really going to be critical for all of us. And one of the things too is that these are some of the resources. We're developing at SPIN a lot of different resources. Here are the infographics, and I know Jenny had shared a link to our PowerPoint handout. And so you can actually click on these to the infographic or video yourselves. Here are some helpful resources that you may find. These, you'll see here, we're doing the infographics, but the video version, because many people may prefer the video versus looking at the infographic. But we, if you would like to also, if you're not on our listserv, you can sign up by clicking the green dot over here. We are developing all kinds of different resources that we share through our monthly e-news. We also have a youth e-news that we launched in January that we send out monthly. So one of the things, yes, thank you for that. Listen and understand their needs to best assist them in their needs. That's absolutely right. And one of the things, you know, as we're leaving here, you know, this is just the first in many steps of all of us. Any way that you all want to work together and that we could help, if it's disability awareness within your agency or organization, we're here to help. So just reach out to us and let us know. I'll just leave you with, and I was so tickled in the beginning. Someone said this, when you close your eyes, what you feel. Someone actually used this, because what I feel is hope. Because when I hear the word disability, the feeling I always get is hope, because we have no other option as families, right? And I know there are great things that we can accomplish together. The other thing, when I see the image I see, is not only my family, it's all of our families together. And it's not just one person, it's all of us. And I know that we can achieve great things together. One of the things that I had shared presenting at the SEAC, and I'll share it again, but one of the things as a family that I have to pray. I have to pray for my brother Grant that I live one breath longer than him. And that is the most horrible reality that there is. Because although the thought of that would be unbearable, I know Grant is a wonderful advocate, not only for himself, but others. But many times people don't listen to him. He is a wonderful young man. Or I say young, we're both getting pretty old. I'm just going to tell you all. But people don't give him the opportunity. I worked hard to advocate for him, but still people don't give him the opportunity. I know that if Grant did not have that support, that there's no telling where he would be. And so that's why every day I have to pray for that. Because that is the reality of the world that we live in. And so, not to end on an emotional note, but it is very real to each of us. And we want to do all we can so that we can build and bridge those gaps, because the reality of our everyday lives, the inequality that exists, is many times unbearable, and nobody's being intentional, right? 99.999% of people are not intentionally trying to, right? That's just not how they are. But when you add that onto every interaction that you as an individual with a disability or a family have just in one day, when everyone puts those barriers up, it can be overwhelming. And my hope is that if you don't know that from a personal experience, that you never have to experience that to understand and see the importance. But know that we are all here to help and work together. And we are so grateful for you all. And if you want to reach out to us anytime, but we're grateful that you all joined us today. And I'm going to check real quick because I know we're hitting time. If we can get to, if there are any questions that you all might have, I know Jenny had shared in the chat the link for the evaluation. We greatly appreciate your feedback. I don't see any questions here, but we appreciate you all, and please reach out if we can help, okay? Bye-bye now.